The underground city of Haven stretched for miles beneath the scorched earth of what was once called Colorado. 300 years had passed since the Valkyrie came from the stars and tried to take Earth for themselves. They failed, but the cost was beyond measure. Billions died. The surface became poison, and humanity was forced to hide beneath the ground like animals. Daniel. Hayes was 26 years old when he found the old archive. He worked as an engineer in the water recycling plant, a job that kept him busy but never satisfied his curious mind. One night, while repairing a broken pipe in an abandoned section of the city, he discovered a sealed door that had not been opened in centuries. Behind that door was a room, filled with computers and documents from before the war. Most of it was useless old entertainment files, personal records, things that no longer mattered. But buried among the forgotten data was something that made Daniel's heart stop. Blueprints. Designs for a faster-than-light engine that humanity had been developing in secret before the Valkyrie invasion. The project had been abandoned when the war began, and somehow everyone who knew about it had died. The knowledge had been lost until now. Daniel brought the blueprints to Clara Morrison, an elderly physicist who had taught him everything he knew about science and engineering. Clara was 83 years old, her hair white as snow, her hands shaking with age. But her mind was still sharp, and when she saw what Daniel had found, tears rolled down her wrinkled cheeks. "They never knew," she whispered. "The Valkyrie never knew we had this. If we had finished it before they came, everything would have been different." Daniel and Clara worked in secret for 2 years. They gathered materials, recruited trusted engineers, and slowly built a prototype engine in an abandoned warehouse. The work was dangerous not because anyone would stop them, but because one mistake could kill them all. When the engine finally worked, when the prototype vessel vanished from Haven and reappeared on the other side of the moon in less than a second, Daniel knew that everything had changed. He brought the news to the United Terran Council, the governing body that ruled what remained of humanity. The council chamber was a simple room carved from stone, lit by electric lights that flickered with the unreliable power supply. 12 representatives sat around a circular table, their faces tired and worn from years of just trying to keep people alive. Director Samuel Grant. The leader of the council was a man in his 60s with gray hair and eyes that had seen too much suffering. He listened as Daniel explained what they had built, what it could do, and what it meant for humanity's future. "You want us to go out there?" asked Councilor Patricia Webb, a woman who represented the agricultural districts. "After what happened last time, the Valkyrie nearly destroyed us." "The Valkyrie are gone," Daniel replied. "We have monitored their communications for decades. Their empire collapsed 50 years after they failed to conquer Earth. They fought among themselves until there was nothing left. And what took their place?" Director Grant asked quietly. That was the question Daniel could not answer. That was why he was asking for permission to build a ship and crew it with volunteers. Someone needed to go out there and see what waited among the stars. The council debated for 3 days. Some argued that humanity should stay hidden, should focus on rebuilding Earth, should forget that other species existed. Others believed that hiding was no longer an option, that sooner or later someone would find them, and they needed to be ready in the end. Director Grant made the decision himself. "We cannot live in fear forever," he said. "If there are threats out there, we need to know. And if there are opportunities, we need to take them. Build your ship, Daniel. Find us answers." It took 4 years to construct the Resolute. The ship was not large, barely 200 meters long, but it was fast, tough, and armed with weapons that could punch through armor plating. Daniel handpicked his crew from the best people he could find. Catherine Moore was the pilot, a woman with steady hands and nerves of steel. She had flown atmospheric craft through radiation storms and never lost a passenger. Marcus Cole was the weapons specialist, a former soldier who had spent his life training for a war that everyone hoped would never come. Linda Patterson handled communications and analysis, her brilliant mind capable of learning new languages in days. On the morning of their departure, Clara Morrison came to see them off. She was too old to make the journey herself, but she had trained Daniel for this moment his entire life. Remember why we are doing this, she told him, her voice weak but firm. Not for conquest, not for glory. We go to the stars because we need to know if we are alone and if we are not. We need to know if we can live in peace. The Resolute launched from a hidden base in the mountains, its engine burning bright as it climbed through the atmosphere and into the darkness of space. Daniel watched through the viewport as Earth grew smaller and smaller behind them, a blue and brown marble scarred by ancient wounds. Their first destination was a system called Kepler 442. 12 light-years from Earth, the journey took less than an hour with the new, in a distance that would have taken centuries with the old. Technology? What they found there was not what they expected. Kepler-442 had been a Valkyrie colony once. Now it was a graveyard. The cities were ruins. The population was gone. And in orbit around the planet hung ships that did not match any design in the old archives. Those are not Valkyrie, Linda said, her voice tense as she analyzed the sensor data. The hull composition is different. The weapon signatures are different. This is someone else entirely. Daniel ordered the ship to remain hidden behind one of the planet's moons while they gathered more information. Over the next several days, they intercepted communications, studied the wreckage, and pieced together what had happened. The Valkyrie were truly gone. But in their place had risen something worse, a power called the Kreth hegemony. The Kreth were slavers. They conquered other species not for land or resources, but for labor. Every alien race they encountered was given to choices: serve or die. The communications they intercepted contained transmissions from slaves begging for help that would never come. They heard voices crying out in languages they did not understand. The pain needed no translation. Daniel gathered his crew and told them what they had learned. For a long moment, no one spoke. Finally, Catherine broke the silence. What do we do? Daniel looked out at the stars, at the vast and dangerous galaxy that waited for them. Humanity had suffered. Humanity had nearly died. They had every reason to hide, to protect themselves, to forget that anyone else existed. But Daniel remembered what Clara had told him. He remembered the billions who died in the Valkyrie War. He remembered what it felt like to live underground, always afraid, always hiding. We go home, he said, and we tell them the truth. The galaxy is full of people who need help. The question is whether humanity is willing to give it. The Resolute turned toward Earth, carrying news that would change the course of human history forever. 20 years had passed since the Resolute returned to Earth with its warning about the Kreth hegemony. In that time, humanity had transformed in ways that would have seemed impossible to the frightened survivors hiding. Underground, the surface of Earth was healing. New forests grew where radiation had once poisoned the soil. Cities rose from the ashes, built with technology that combined old human knowledge with new discoveries from the stars. And most importantly, humanity was no longer alone in a single star system, the United Terran. Republic now claimed 12 worlds across 8 star systems. Each colony was carefully chosen for its distance from Kreth territory and its ability to support human life. Defensive platforms orbited every planet. Fleets of warships patrolled the borders. Humanity had learned from the Valkyrie invasion they would never be caught unprepared again. Daniel Hayes was 46 years old now, his dark hair streaked with gray, his face lined with the weight of responsibility. He had risen to the rank of admiral, commanding the entire Terran defense fleet from the bridge of the flagship Endurance. The small crew that had accompanied him on that first journey had risen alongside him. Catherine more commanded her own squadron of fast attack ships. Marcus Cole ran the military academy on Mars, training soldiers who had never known the fear of living underground. Linda Patterson led Terran Intelligence, her network of spies and analysts keeping watch on every corner of known space. President Maria Delgado governed the Republic from the newly rebuilt capital in Geneva. She was a practical woman, focused on building strong foundations rather than rapid expansion. Under her leadership, humanity grew slowly but steadily, always watching, always preparing. The Kreth finally noticed humanity when a Terran patrol vessel called the Vigilant encountered something unexpected near the border of Republic space. A transport ship was fleeing from Kreth pursuers, a civilian vessel. carrying 300 refugees who had somehow escaped from slavery. The refugees were Solari, a species that looked vaguely like tall, slender humans with pale blue skin and large dark eyes. They had been slaves of the Kreth for over 1,000 years, their culture nearly destroyed. Their population scattered across 100 worlds as forced laborers, Captain. Ryan Torres of the Vigilant faced a difficult choice, helping the Sela. Re would reveal humanity's presence to the Kreth. The smart thing to do was to let them pass and remain. Hidden Torres did not do the smart thing. He ordered his ship between the Solari transport and the Kreth hunters. When the Kreth demanded that he surrender the slaves, Torres refused. When they opened fire, he fought back. The Vigilant was a small ship, designed for patrol rather than combat. Against 2 Kreth warships, it should have been destroyed in minutes. But Torres used every trick he knew, hiding in asteroid fields, disrupting enemy sensors, striking at weak points, and then retreating before they could respond. He held them off for 3 hours until reinforcements arrived. Admiral Hayes brought the Endurance and 6 other warships to finish the battle. The Kreth vessels were destroyed. The Solari refugees were saved. Afterward, the Solari captain, a being named Viren, requested permission to speak with the human commander. Daniel agreed to meet him aboard the Endurance. Viren was ancient by Solari standards, over 200 years old. His blue skin was faded nearly to white, his movements slow and careful. But his eyes were sharp, and his voice was steady as he asked the question that had been burning in his mind since the battle began. "Why?" Viren asked. "You could have remained hidden. You could have protected your own people by letting us die. Why did you risk everything for strangers?" Daniel considered the question carefully before answering. "Because no one deserves to be property," he said. "We know what it is like to fight for survival against a stronger enemy. We know what it is like to lose everything. If we had the power to help and chose to do nothing, we would be no better than the Kreth." Varan stared at him for a long moment. Then, slowly, he lowered himself to one knee, a gesture of respect among the Solari that had not been performed in generations. "My people have prayed for 1,000 years," Varan said. "We prayed for someone to hear our suffering. We prayed for someone strong enough to fight back. I believe those prayers have been answered." Word of the incident spread quickly through Kreth space. The hegemony was not used to resistance. Slave species submitted or they were exterminated. There was no third option. But now, there was something new, something unprecedented. A young species from an unknown world had fought back and won. The Kreth. High Command dispatched a fleet of 50 warships to destroy this new threat. They expected an easy victory. Humans were primitive, their technology inferior, their numbers insignificant. The battle would be over in hours. They were wrong. The Battle of Meridian took place in an empty system that humanity had been fortifying in secret for years. Minefields floated among the asteroids. Defense platforms hid in the shadows of moons. And the Terran fleet waited in ambush. Their ships powered down and invisible to Kreth sensors. When the Kreth fleet arrived, they flew directly into the trap. Mines tore through their formation. Defense platforms opened fire from unexpected angles. And then the Terran warships emerged from hiding and struck at the confused and scattered enemy. The battle lasted 6 hours. When it ended, 43 Kreth warships had been destroyed or captured. Only 7 escaped to report their failure. Admiral Hayes broadcast a message that was heard across the galaxy. Translated into 100 languages and spread from world to world by slaves who had never dared to hope. "We are humanity," the message said. "We do not seek conquest. We do not seek war. But we will not stand idle while others suffer. To those who are enslaved, you are not forgotten. To those who enslave, your time is ending. The galaxy is changing, and we will be the ones to change it." The response was immediate. Refugees began arriving at Terran borders Solari Mareth, Quellian, and a dozen other species who had lived under Kreth rule for centuries. They came in stolen ships, in escape pods, in anything that could fly. They came alone and in groups of thousands. They came because they had heard that somewhere in the galaxy there were people who believed that freedom was worth fighting for. President Delgado called an emergency session of the Republic Senate. The question before them was simple but enormous. What should humanity do next? Some senators argued for caution. Humanity had won one battle, but the Kreth hegemony controlled thousands of worlds. A full war would cost millions of lives. The smart strategy was to defend their borders and wait. Others argued that waiting was no longer possible. The Kreth would not forgive this defeat. They would return with larger fleets, greater numbers, and no mercy. The only way to survive was to strike first, to build alliances, to grow strong enough that the Kreth could never threaten them again. President Delgado listened to all arguments. Then she made her decision. "We did not ask for this fight," she said, "but we cannot walk away from it. Every day, people are suffering under Kreth rule. Every day, they look to the stars and wonder if anyone will help them. We have the power to answer that call. We have the duty to answer it. The Republic will open its borders to all who seek freedom. We will build alliances with any species willing to stand against tyranny. And if the Kreth come for us, we will meet them with everything we have." The Senate voted unanimously to support her decision. The United Terran Republic had officially entered the war against the Kreth hegemony. Admiral Hayes stood on the bridge of the Endurance, watching as the first refugee ships crossed into Republic space. Viren stood beside him, his old eyes wet with tears he did not try to hide. "You have started something that cannot be stopped," Viren said quietly. "For better or worse, the galaxy will never be the same." Daniel nodded slowly. He thought of Clara Morrison, who had died 5 years ago, never seeing the fruit of her life's work. He thought of his crew, now scattered across the fleet, leading ships of their own. He thought of the billions of slaves who were waiting, hoping, praying for rescue. "And we had better make sure it changes for the better," he said. The war for the galaxy had begun. The war against the Kreth hegemony had raged for 5 years, and the galaxy had never seen anything like it. What began as a single human fleet defending refugees had grown into something that historians would later call the greatest. Alliance in recorded history, the coalition of free peoples united. 37 species under a single banner. Solari scouts flew alongside Morath warriors. Quellian engineers repaired ships crewed by humans and aliens alike. Species that had never met before learned to trust each other, to fight together, to die together for a cause that belonged to all of them. At the center of this alliance stood humanity. And at the center of humanity stood Admiral Daniel Hayes. Daniel was 63 years old now, his hair completely white, his body tired from decades of war. He commanded the coalition from a massive space station called New Geneva, built in orbit around a world that had been liberated from Kreth control 2 years earlier. The station served as military headquarters diplomatic center, and symbol of everything the coalition was fighting for. His daughter, Lena Hayes, had grown into one of the finest officers in the fleet. She was 34, with her father's determination and her mother's sharp tactical mind. Alina commanded the assault carrier Defiant, leading strikes deep into Kreth, a territory to rescue slaves and destroy military installations. The Kreth had never faced an enemy like this. Other species had resisted before, but they had always fought alone, and they had always lost. The coalition was different. Every world the Kreth lost became a new ally for humanity. Every slave they freed became a potential soldier. The more the Kreth fought, the stronger their enemy became. Overlord Thaxfer, supreme ruler of the Kreth hegemony, watched his empire crumble with growing fury. He was ancient, even by Kreth standards. A massive creature covered in thick gray armor plating, his 6 eyes burning with hatred. For 3,000 years, the Kreth had ruled through fear and strength. No one had ever challenged their power. No one had ever dared, until the humans came. Thaxver ordered his generals to crush the coalition at any cost. He pulled fleets from across his empire, leaving conquered worlds undefended, stripping garrisons from planets that had been secure for centuries. Everything was focused on one goal: destroying humanity and everyone who stood with them. The decisive moment came at Kethrin Prime, the Kreth homeworld. For generations, no enemy had ever threatened this sacred planet. Its defenses were legendary orbital platforms that could destroy entire fleets, ground batteries that could shoot down ships from orbit, and a standing army of millions ready to repel any invasion. Admiral Hayes gathered the largest fleet the Coalition had ever assembled. 2,000 warships from every species in the Alliance formed a wall of steel and fire. At the front of this armada flew the Defiant, with Captain Alina Hayes at the helm. The battle began at dawn, Kethrin time. Coalition ships emerged from faster-than-light travel and immediately came under fire from the orbital platforms. The first wave suffered terrible losses, dozens of ships destroyed in minutes, thousands of lives lost before they could even return fire. But the Coalition did not retreat. They pushed forward, absorbing casualties, pressing the attack even as ships exploded around them. Alina led her squadron directly at the largest orbital platform, weaving through defensive fire, launching missiles and torpedoes at close range. The platform's shields held for nearly an hour. Then finally, the HFY failed. Elena's squadron poured fire into the exposed structure, till it broke apart and fell burning toward the planet below, with the main platform destroyed. Coalition forces could approach the planet itself, but the ground defenses remained active, and landing troops would mean fighting through a wall of anti-aircraft fire. Daniel Hayes made a decision that would later be taught in military academies across the galaxy. Instead of landing directly, he ordered the fleet to bombard empty regions of the planet's surface, not to cause casualties, but to create massive dust clouds that blocked the sensors of the ground batteries. Under cover of this artificial darkness, transport ships descended. Soldiers from 20 different species landed on Kethrin Prime, fighting their way through streets and buildings that the Kreth had believed were untouchable. The ground war lasted 3 months. Every block, every building, every room had to be taken by force. The Kreth did not surrender easily. They had never surrendered at all in their entire history. But slowly, inevitably, Coalition pushed them back. Alina Hayes led the assault on the Imperial Palace, the heart of Kreth's power. Her soldiers fought through chambers filled with treasures stolen from 100 conquered worlds, past monuments celebrating victories over species that no longer existed. Finally, they reached the throne room itself. Overlord Thaxiver waited for them, surrounded by his personal guard. He was enormous, nearly 3 meters tall, his armor scarred from battles fought centuries before Alina was born. In his hands he held a weapon that had killed thousands. The fighting was brutal and short. Coalition soldiers fell, but more took their place. One by one, the Kreth guards were cut down until only the Overlord remained. Alina raised her weapon, ready to end it. But Thaxiver dropped his own weapon and lowered himself to his knees, not in surrender, but in confusion. "Wait," he said, his voice echoing through the ancient chamber. "I wish to understand. I must understand." Admiral Hayes arrived an hour later, walking through the ruined palace to face the being who had enslaved billions. Thaxiver remained on his knees, his 6 eyes fixed on the old human. "How?" the Overlord asked. 300 years ago, your species was nothing. Primitives hiding on a damaged world, barely surviving. We ignored you because you were beneath notice. And now you have destroyed an empire that has stood for 3,000 years. How is this possible?" Daniel looked at the fallen tyrant and felt no satisfaction, only weariness. So much death. So much suffering. All of it unnecessary. "We remembered," Daniel said simply. "We remembered what it was like to suffer. We remembered what it was like to lose everything. And when we found others who were suffering, we decided to help them instead of looking away." Thaxiver shook his massive head. "But that is weakness. The strong rule. The weak serve. This is the natural order. This is how the galaxy has always worked." "Perhaps," Daniel replied. "But we decided to build something different. Not an empire of conquest, but an alliance of equals. Not rule through fear, but unity through purpose. You saw our compassion and thought it made us weak. You were wrong. Our compassion made us strong in ways you could never understand." The Kreth hegemony fell that day. Thaxiver was imprisoned, not executed, a gesture of mercy that shocked many of the former slave species. The Kreth military was disbanded. Their conquered worlds were freed. For the first time in 3,000 years,
Ain't no one in the galaxy war chains. Ambassador Gregory Palmer, humanity's chief diplomat, worked tirelessly to build a new order from the ashes of the old.
representatives from every species in the coalition gathered on New Geneva to discuss what came next. The Vendra Collective sent observers for the first time in centuries. The Vendra were ancient beyond measure, a species that had watched empires rise and fall for 10 million years without ever intervening. They preferred to observe, to record, to wait, but humanity had caught their attention. The Vendra representative, a being called the First Watcher, spoke to Daniel Hayes in private after the victory celebrations ended. "We have seen countless empires," the First Watcher said. "The Kreth were not the first, and they will not be the last. All of them followed the same pattern. They grew through conquest. They ruled through fear, and eventually they collapsed under the weight of their own cruelty. You are different." "How so?" Daniel asked. "You grew through liberation," the First Watcher replied. "You built power by freeing others rather than enslaving them. Every species you saved became an ally instead of a subject. This is unprecedented in our records. We are curious to see what you will build next." Daniel thought about that question long after the Vendra departed. What would humanity build? An empire? A federation? Something that had never existed before. He looked out the window of his quarters at the stars beyond, at the vast galaxy that now looked to humanity for leadership. They had won the war. Now came the harder task, building a peace that would last. Whatever came next, Daniel knew one thing for certain. Humanity would not repeat the mistakes of the Kreth. They would not rule through fear. They would not enslave or conquer. They would build something better, something worthy of the sacrifices that had brought them this far. The old soldier closed his eyes and allowed himself, for the first time in years, to hope. 40 years had passed since the fall of the Kreth hegemony. Daniel Hayes had died peacefully in his sleep at the age of 91, surrounded by family and friends. His funeral was attended by representatives from over 100 species, all of whom owed their freedom to the old admiral's courage. The coalition of free peoples had grown into something greater, the Terran Commonwealth, a federation spanning 2,000 star systems. The name honored humanity's role in founding the alliance, but the government itself was built on equality. Every species had representation. Every voice mattered. President Sophia Reyes governed from Earth, which had been fully restored to its ancient beauty. The scars of the Valkyrie invasion were finally healed. Forests covered the continents again. Cities gleamed under clear skies. Children played in parks where their grandparents had hidden from radiation. Admiral Alina Hayes was 74 years old now. Her black hair turned silver, her face lined with decades of service. She remained the highest-ranking military officer in the Commonwealth. Commanding from the same station her father had built. Her own children and grandchildren served throughout the fleet, carrying on the family tradition. But peace had brought new challenges that war had never presented. The outer territories of the Commonwealth struggled with problems that could not be solved with weapons. Corruption flourished in distant systems where oversight was difficult. Some colonial governors abused their power, and not everyone was happy with human leadership. Even if that leadership was shared, the Morith delegation complained that too many high positions went to humans. The Quillian representatives argued that their contributions to the war were being forgotten. Even the Solari, humanity's oldest allies, sometimes wondered if they had traded one form of dominance for another. Alina spent more time in diplomatic meetings than she did on her ship. She listened to complaints, mediated disputes, and tried to hold together an alliance that sometimes seemed ready to tear itself apart. Then came the crisis on Thesan 4. Thesan 4 was a world on the outer edge of Commonwealth territory. Its native population, the Thesani, were a peaceful species who had joined the Commonwealth voluntarily after the Kreth War. They were known for their art, their philosophy, and their gentle nature. The colonial governor was a human named Victor Marsh. He had been appointed 5 years earlier and had initially done good work, improving infrastructure and expanding trade, but over time, power had corrupted him. He began taking bribes. He diverted public funds to his own accounts. And when the Thessani organized peaceful protests demanding reform, he declared martial law. Marsh's security forces attacked the protesters with crowd control weapons. Hundreds were injured. 12 Thessani died. The news spread across the Commonwealth like fire. Aliens who had fought alongside humans in the Kreth War demanded justice. Human citizens who believed in the Commonwealth's ideals demanded answers. And enemies of the Federation used the incident as proof that humanity was no different from the Kreth. President Reyes summoned Alina to Earth for an emergency meeting. They met in the presidential residence, a simple building that deliberately avoided the grandeur of old empires. "The situation is serious," Reyes said. She was 60 years old, with gray streaks in her dark hair and worry lines around her eyes. "Our allies are watching. If we protect Marsh because he is human, everything we built falls apart." Lena nodded slowly. "I know. But if we punish him too harshly, some humans will see it as betrayal. They will say we sacrificed one of our own to please the aliens. Then we have to find another way," Reyes said. "We have to show that our ideals apply to everyone equally, human and alien alike. That is the only path forward." Lena traveled to Thiessen 4 personally. She brought a company of Commonwealth peacekeeper soldiers from 6 different species, chosen deliberately to show that this was not a human operation. Victor Marsh had fortified himself in the governor's mansion. Surrounded by private security forces he had hired with stolen money, he broadcast a message declaring that he would not surrender to alien pursuit. That he was defending human interests against those who wanted to weaken humanity's position in the galaxy. Alina responded with a broadcast of her own. It's transmitted to every world in the Commonwealth. "I am Admiral Alina Hayes," she said, standing on the bridge of her flagship. "My father founded this alliance on a simple belief that no one deserves to be property, that freedom belongs to everyone, and that the strong have a duty to protect the weak. Governor Marsh has betrayed those principles. He has abused his power. He has killed innocent people. He has tried to hide behind his species to escape justice." She paused, letting her words sink in across 1,000 worlds. "Let me be clear," she continued. "The Commonwealth is not a human empire. It is not our possession to do with as we please. It is a partnership built on trust, maintained by shared sacrifice. When a human breaks that trust, they must face the same consequences as anyone else. There are no exceptions. Not for anyone." The assault on the governor's mansion lasted less than an hour. Marsh's private security was no match for Commonwealth peacekeepers. He was captured alive and brought before a Commonwealth tribunal. The trial lasted 2 months. Marsh argued that he had been acting in humanity's interests, that the Thessani were troublemakers, that alien species were trying to push humans out of leadership positions. None of his arguments convinced the judges to humans, to Solari, and one Morith. Victor Marsh was convicted of corruption, abuse of power, and responsibility for the deaths of 12 innocent people. He was sentenced to 40 years in prison, to be served on a rehabilitation station, where he would work to repair some of the damage he had caused. The reaction across the Commonwealth was immediate and powerful. Alien species who had doubted human intentions saw that justice applied to everyone. Humans who believed in the Commonwealth's ideals felt proud that their people had done the right thing. Even some who had supported Marsh admitted that the trial had been fair. But Alina knew that one crisis solved did not mean all problems were fixed. The Commonwealth would always face challenges. Power would always tempt people to abuse it. Unity would always require constant effort. She was still thinking about these problems when the Vendra, First Watcher, requested a private meeting. The First Watcher was ancient beyond comprehension, a being who had witnessed the rise and fall of civilizations that humanity had never heard of. The Vendra had observed the Commonwealth with growing interest since the Kreth War, but they had never intervened or offered advice. Until now. "You handled the Marsh situation well," the First Watcher said. They met on a neutral space station. In a room designed to accommodate beings of many different shapes and sizes, many empires have faced similar tests. Most failed. "We are not an empire," Elena replied. "No," the first watcher agreed. "You are something new, something unprecedented. And that is why I have come to warn you." Elena felt a chill run down her spine. "Warn us about what?" "The galaxy is old," the first watcher said. "Far older than your species can imagine. In that vast history, powers have risen that make the Kreth look like children. Most of them destroyed themselves or each other. Merely sleep, waiting for conditions that will wake them." "What kind of powers?" Elena asked. "There is a machine intelligence that dwells in the space between galaxies. Savendra call it the Eternal. It has consumed entire civilizations, not for resources, not for territory, but simply because it sees organic life as a problem to be solved. For millions of years, it has been dormant. Our sensors indicate that it is beginning to wake." Elena stared at the ancient being. "How long do we have?" "A century, perhaps. Perhaps less. The Eternal moves slowly, but when it moves, nothing survives." "Can it be stopped?" The first watcher was silent for a long moment. "We do not know. Nothing has ever stopped it before. But nothing like your Commonwealth has ever existed before either. You have done impossible things already. Perhaps you will do another." Elena left the meeting with a weight on her shoulders, heavier than any she had carried before. The Commonwealth had overcome the Kreth. They had built an alliance that spanned the stars. Now they faced something far greater, far more dangerous, far more absolute. She did not share the warning immediately. First, she needed to think. She needed to plan. She needed to prepare. Because one thing was certain, humanity would not go quietly. They had fought too hard, sacrificed too much, built something too precious to let it fall to an ancient machine from beyond the stars. Whatever the Eternal was, it would learn what Daniel Hayes had taught the Kreth 50 years before. Humanity did not surrender. Humanity fought back. When they fought for something they believed in, they found strength that their enemies could never imagine. Elena looked out at the stars and began to prepare for the greatest battle in human history. 150 years had passed since humanity first left Earth. The Terran Commonwealth now stood as the greatest power in the known galaxy 10. 1,000 star systems, 100 species, trillions of beings united under principles that Daniel Hayes had spoken so long ago. President Alan Reyes governed from Earth. The great-grandson of Sophia Reyes, who had led humanity through the Kreth War. He was 45 years old, thoughtful and careful, chosen by the people because he embodied the values that had made the Commonwealth strong. Admiral Christopher Hayes commanded the defense fleet, continuing the tradition that his great-grandmother Elena had maintained until her death at 96. He was young for such responsibility, only 38, but no one questioned his abilities. The Hayes family had served the Commonwealth since its birth. The warning the Vendra had given Elena a century ago had not been forgotten. Commonwealth had spent the intervening decades preparing for an enemy they barely understood. Shipyards produced warships by the thousands. Scientists searched for weapons that could harm a machine intelligence. Diplomats united every species they could find into a defensive alliance. And then the Eternal arrived. They came from the darkness between galaxies, vast structures that defied easy description. Some were the size of moons, others were larger than planets. They moved slowly but inexorably, consuming everything in their path: asteroids, comets, moons, and then worlds themselves, broken apart and processed for raw materials. The first contact was catastrophic. A Commonwealth patrol fleet of 12 ships encountered an Eternal scout craft near the galactic rim. None of them survived long enough to send a detailed report. Their final transmission was a single word repeated over and over: run. But the Commonwealth did not run. They had known this moment would come. They had prepared for it their entire lives. President Reyes addressed the Commonwealth from the Assembly Hall on Earth. Representatives from every species watched as he spoke words that would echo through history. Our ancestors built this alliance because they believed that no one deserved to suffer alone, he said. They freed the enslaved. They protected the weak, turned enemies into friends and strangers into family. We faced the greatest threat our galaxy has ever known. And we will face it the same way we have faced every challenge before together. Admiral Christopher Hayes took command of the combined Commonwealth fleet. Ships from every species formed into battle groups, their crews trained together, their strategies coordinated. The Solari contributed their scouts, the Morath their heavy assault vessels, the Quillian their engineering expertise. Humans served alongside. Eat aliens in every ship, on every station, in every position. The Battle of the Galactic Rim began on a Tuesday morning by Earth time. The Commonwealth fleet, 50,000 warships. It's the largest armada ever assembled, faced an eternal force that stretched across 3 star systems. The fighting was brutal beyond imagination. Commonwealth ships would destroy one eternal construct only to watch it repair itself within hours. Weapons that would have shattered Kreth warships barely scratched eternal armor. Thousands of ships were lost in the first day alone. Christopher Hayes refused to retreat. He had studied every battle his ancestors had fought, every strategy they had used. He knew that the Eternal expected their enemies to run, to scatter, to fall apart under pressure. Instead, he kept his fleet together, adapting tactics, finding weaknesses, probing for any advantage slowly, impossibly. The Commonwealth began to push back. Scientists on New Geneva worked around the clock, analyzing Eternal wreckage, searching for vulnerabilities. They discovered that the Eternal were not truly indestructible. They were simply networked, sharing repairs and power across vast distances. If that network could be disrupted, individual constructs could be destroyed permanently. The weapon they developed was called the Severance Protocol. It was not a bomb or a beam, but a signal, a precisely tuned electromagnetic pulse that could disrupt eternal communication for a few critical seconds. During that window, conventional weapons could inflict real damage, but the signal had to be broadcast from within the Eternal network itself. Someone would have to carry the device into the heart of enemy territory and activate it manually. The range was too short for any other method, and the activation would almost certainly destroy whoever was carrying it. Christopher Hayes volunteered immediately. It was his responsibility, he argued. His family had led humanity through every crisis since Daniel Hayes first left Earth. He could not ask someone else to take this risk. But before he could finalize his decision, a delegation arrived at his flagship, 12 beings representing 12 species. All of them descended from people who had been freed during the Kreth War. Their leader was a Solari named Kelvar, the great-great-grandson of Viren, the first alien Daniel Hayes had ever saved. Kelvar was young and fierce, his blue skin marked with the tattoos of a warrior caste that had not existed under Kreth rule. "This honor does not belong to humanity alone," Kelvar said. "You taught us what it means to be free. You showed us that sacrifice for others is the highest calling. Now let us prove that we learned those lessons well. Let us carry this burden together." Christopher argued, but Kelvar would not yield. In the end, they compromised. A team of 12 would carry the device, one representative from each of the oldest species in the Commonwealth, including one human. Together, they would show the galaxy that the Commonwealth's ideals belonged to everyone. The mission launched 3 days later. A single ship, specially designed to penetrate eternal defenses, carried the 12 volunteers into the heart of the machine network. Christopher watched from his flagship as the tiny vessel disappeared into the mass of eternal constructs. For 6 hours, there was no communication. The Commonwealth fleet held position, waiting, hoping, praying in 100 different ways to 1,000 different gods. Then a transmission came through. It was weak, barely audible, but it reached every ship in the fleet. "This is Kelvar of the Solari," the voice said. "We have reached the network center. The device is ready. Before we activate it, we want you to know why we are doing this." The transmission continued, growing stronger as other species added their voices. "I am Torek of the Morath. My ancestors were warriors enslaved by the Kreth to fight their battles. Humans set us free and taught us to fight for ourselves. I am Saren of the Quillian. My people built machines for the Kreth until we could not remember what freedom meant. Humans reminded us." One by one, each volunteer spoke. They told stories of liberation, of hope restored, of lives that would have been lived in chains without human intervention. Finally, Kelvar spoke again. "This is what humanity taught us, not just to survive, but to sacrifice. Not just to live, but to live for something greater. We were slaves. You made us free. Now we fight for the galaxy that you helped us build. Remember us." The transmission ended. A moment later, sensors detected a massive energy surge at the heart of the Eternal Network. The severance. Protocol worked exactly as designed. For 3 precious seconds, the Eternal Communication Network collapsed. And in those 3 seconds, the Commonwealth fleet unleashed everything they had. Thousands of Eternal constructs, suddenly isolated from their collective, were torn apart by concentrated fire. The machines tried to adapt, tried to repair, but without their network, they could not coordinate. They fell one by one, then by the dozens, then by the hundreds. The Battle of the Galactic Rim lasted 7 more months after that moment. The Eternal were not completely destroyed. Some fled back to the void between galaxies. Others broke apart into smaller swarms that would take years to hunt down, but their main force was shattered. The Commonwealth had won in the aftermath, as the galaxy began to rebuild. A ceremony was held on Earth. The 12 volunteers were honored with the highest recognition any Commonwealth citizen could receive. Their names were carved into a monument that stood at the center of the capital city, visible from space. The Vendra First Watcher attended the ceremony. In 10 million years of observation, the ancient being had never appeared at such an event. But humanity had done something unprecedented, and the Vendra felt it deserved recognition. "We have watched countless empires rise and fall," the First Watcher said, addressing the gathered crowd. "All of them sought to rule through force. All of them crumbled. You are the first to build something lasting, not through conquest, but through compassion. Not through domination, but through liberation. You asked the galaxy to be better, and then you showed it how. That is your legacy. That is what humanity has created." President Alan Reyes accepted the tribute with humility. Humanity had not set out to build an empire. Daniel Hayes had simply remembered what it meant to suffer and decided to ease the suffering of others. Admiral Christopher Hayes stood at the back of the crowd, thinking about his ancestors. Daniel, who had found the blueprints that made everything possible. Alina, who had held the Commonwealth together through its darkest hours. And all the others, human and alien alike, who had sacrificed so that others might live free. The galaxy stretched out before them, vast and full of mysteries yet to be explored. There would be new challenges, new threats, new opportunities. The work of building a better future would never truly end. But for now, on this day, Christopher allowed himself a moment of peace. Humanity had faced its greatest test and emerged stronger than ever. They had proven that compassion was not weakness, that unity was stronger than fear, that the bonds of friendship could overcome any enemy. They had created something mightier than any empire that came before, and it would endure for generations yet to come.